Hey, how y'all doing today? Let's do it to it. Okay, we're entering a whole nother section. It's called material. Fear of giving up or taking material. Stepping beyond fear. That's what this is about. Oops, I gotta move this so it's off there. There we go. Over the years, I've given numerous lessons and lectures where the sacrifices of material has been addressed. Players of all ratings are, in general, quite comfortable parting with their stuff if a king hunt and a promise of mate is in the air. However, if material should be sacrificed for a positional reason, I've noticed a state of mental uh, regret of basically remorse and basically not doing it. Strikes even the hardest player. They can't bring themselves to parting with a pawn or exchanging things you can see, understand, or even feel. Let me see. They can't bring themselves to part with a pawn or the exchange. Things you can see, understand, and even feel. If the return is merely a positional or a compensation, a term that reminds us of basically just a word. It promises the whole world basically compensation, but always remains invisible to a learner's mind, a learner's eye. Sorry, not mind. So what Jeremy Stillman's saying, friends, is this: when when you're first starting out as a chess player, because there's a little bit more that we're going to be going over reading, but I wanted to paraphrase it that when you're starting out, sometimes the hardest thing to do is to sacrifice a pawn because what you're thinking is, oh no, I'm going down material. But in reality, if that position makes it, I've actually played a game one time where I sacrificed a pawn to double their pawns in the center, and therefore I placed my knight on an outpost. I got huge compensation for the pawn, and I was able to actually win against a really high level player. Okay, super duper high level, and it's not about material. It's about the type of material that you're left with. See, it's the quality. I like how it is. It's not quantity, it's quality. So if you think of like a quality product that you use that you've had for years and years and years and years, and it still is good, that's quality. Quantity is like something that you get, it wears out really fast, then you got to replace it. That's why there's quantity. And so the same type of thing is, even if you're up, let's say, a ton of material. There's an example of a game that it was a Paul Morphy game. It's called the Opera game. He sacrificed everything. He got down to a bishop and a rook, and he checkmated the earl. I think it was the earl and the duke or something like that. I may have the player names incorrectly stated, but he won with a bishop and rook. It wasn't all the material that those two players had that were playing against him. Yes, they had a tremendous amount of material. They had a lot of quantity of pieces, but the quality of their pieces were uh, zero to none compared to Paul Morphy's bishop and rook, which was enough. The quality of the bishop and rook was enough to checkmate the king. So I'm trying. I guess what I'm trying to say is, don't don't worry about material because material comes and goes. It's the quality of the pieces that you have that matter. That's kind of like you. Even if you have to go down and exchange, and you've seen in some of the Grandmaster games that they'll actually sacrifice a rook for a bishop, but that bishop is more active, more useful than the rook ever thought of being. And so by giving up that rook for the bishop, that their bishop that they have now is stronger because there's no counterpart to challenge it. So you just always got to think that's kind of what he's saying. Okay, and here's more continuation of what we're going to be reading about. I never realized the full extent of this problem until I taught one particular student who loved to launch unsound mating attacks. He'd toss a bishop in the garbage if it allowed him to give the enemy king a few, more often than not, harmless checks. I didn't want to fully discuss. I didn't want to fully discourage this aggression inclination, but I didn't want to show him that I did want to show him that there are other ways to win a game, and that attacks are usually a natural manifestation of various positional imbalances. After quite a few lessons, we finally got around to the discussing positional exchange sacrifices, and he fell in love with the idea. Every time I would show him an example, he would say, "Man, I wish I could do that." I would assure him that the opportunity would arise, and sure enough, his big chance eventually appeared. In diagram 139, this one's coming up, and we'll be putting it in just a second. And it's on the next page. So it's clear that black has played here. I better set it up because this goes with the game. So just give me 1 second. Oh boy, let me get the position set up here. Hold on, bear with me here. All right. Just want to make sure about that I have all this right. Okay, here, there. Right, perfect. It looks good to me. White to move, so we're gonna make this into a. I have to put the name. He calls it his student. So, and this is the name of it's the student. And his rating is 1655. And he's facing NN. I think that's unknown player. So to keep it kind of neutral, I think that's why or maybe sometimes I forget to put the names down on the players that I play, so it could have been maybe that. Or maybe he didn't get permission to use the game too, because sometimes you have to actually get permission from the other player to have the game be recorded in your book. So let me see, do I have that right? Hey, how you doing, Play Okay? We're gonna be hold on, let me get a drink of tea and I'll be right with you guys. 1 sec. Okay, dokie. Let's see, what do we got here? Okay, we had to set this up because part of the prior page went to this game, so we're going to pick up where we left off. White seeing that black intended to double rooks on the e-file. So white seeing that. I just got on. So, yeah, I had some stuff that had to do today, a little bit extra that put my time a little bit back. So we're in it for a little bit of time, so we get to enjoy. You get to enjoy a little bit of the love of this game. This one here, this game right here is one of Jeremy Silman's students, and he's right now we're learning about material sacrificing for positional gain. And the student before he taught him this used to just throw away pieces to get checks at the king, and really he didn't do very good. But then Jeremy Silman got to the part with his student called positional sacrifices, and this is a game where every time he would show his opponent, like maybe a grandmaster game, I'm not his opponent, his student, sorry, and he would show him a sacrificial game from like a grandmaster, and the student would always say, man, I wish I can do a sacrificial move like that. But his student is playing this game as white, and he got the privilege to be able to do a piece sacrifice, and so that's kind of what we're doing right now. I wanted to kind of present that, or forward it with a statement, because in books they put a forward to like kind of what they're going to be talking about. This is an introduction to kind of what's going to be going on. White's going to sacrifice material, but he has to do it just right. So that's kind of the lesson that we're going to be doing, positional sacrifices. White seeing that black intends to double on f to e8. So it's white to move right now. Black wants to play this move here. And if black could get that move in, white potentially could challenge it with rook f e1, but he's going to set up for a positional sacrifice coming to a board game near you, or a chessboard near you. And this is the and so what he plays, after, if rook, he plays rook f e1. I think, let me make sure that he played that move. Yep, that is right, f e1. So we were right. This is actually the move order that. Okay, good, perfect. I thought it stalled there for a second. And after, let me see, make sure he played that. Yep, he played that too. After he played, black played this move here, rook f e8. So white played rook f e1. So basically, they're both like challenging each other. It's kind of like a stare off. Who's gonna move first? That type of a thing. He followed it with. Let me see, make sure I got that right. He could. What he's saying is he could follow this with. This didn't happen in the game, but rook takes f e8 with a subsequent allowing the exchange of all the rooks. So basically, the rook would attack here, the rook would be here, the rook would be here, and then bishop would be on e1. And so this is kind of what could have happened, but it actually didn't happen. The resulting position looks. The resulting position looked and is great, but it proves difficult to infiltrate, and a draw was the eventual result. I pointed out to white that he could have targeted the two weak pawns on d6 and f6 before or after the rook exchanges via knight to e4. So basically, after the exchange is here, and potentially, we'll say, I'm going to try to find a good move for let's say, we'll say we lock this down here. That's probably not the best move because it surrenders. So I probably wouldn't lock that down because it surrenders that point there. Maybe we will try. We'll try king h7. We'll just try king h7 just to do a move. What Jeremy Silman showed his student was that potentially he could target with the knight these two pawns here, get a bishop here, and attack there. And then potentially later on break through on the queen side. So, and then bishop c3, and then queen d2, b2 would be played alright as well. This would have left black in a good deal to have to deal with. However, far more interesting to me was something that most chess masters do without thinking. This is what they do. Okay, we played at this point to here, and so now it's rook. This is what most chess grandmasters play: is rook e6. This is a positional sacrifice right here. We had a look at a similar. This is a plug. He calls it a plug. My teacher called it a anchor point. And remember what we talked about. How black, even though let's say exchanges the bishop off, which he probably will, the bishop for this, and let's say he takes. Remember, the whole idea of rooks is open files, right? There's not one open file here. So even though black's up an exchange, his exchange is not as effective as white's exchange, which would be the light square bishop. So you have to also take into consideration which pawn you're going to take to the bank of taking with too. A sacrifice in our lesson. So when he noticed this position, he said, I saw it, but I just couldn't bring myself to giving the rook away. I didn't even get a pawn for it, and there's no king side attack at all. I wanted to do it because of what you showed me in past lessons, but my hand refused to make the move. Clearly, the ingrained programming that prevented us from giving away material is extremely strong. As a result, the point of this chapter isn't just to give examples of material sacrifice, but also to help the student break down those walls that prevent him or her from following his imbalanced training. Let's start by asking a simple question. Why is rook e6 such a good move? Isn't it clear that the rook is a monster on a monster? Sorry, let me make sure. Isn't it clear that the rook is a monster on that square, and that if it's allowed to remain, it not only kills off both black rooks, but it also adds to the pressure against f6 and d6. But all this wouldn't mean much to a learner player or a beginning player who will rightfully demand to know why the rook can't be taken. Of course, it can be taken, but after bishop takes e6, like how we showed it here. And then I had it wrong. It wasn't f takes. It was actually, I thought it might be this. D takes e6. After D takes e6, we are left with the following one side breakdown of imbalances. Black is up in exchange. That's it. That's all. These are the pros. So the only thing that black has that he has is a solid exchange up. White has more queen side, king side, and central space. He possesses two very active bishops. The pawn on d6 is very weak for black. The pawn on f6 is also vulnerable and can be attacked via knight to d5, and then potentially more attacks to take the pawn later on, followed by swinging the queen to the dark square and the bishop over to a1 to f8 diagonal. The d pawn is at d5 is a gaping hole which can be a home for the knight or the bishop indefinitely. The protected pass pawn on e6 is a monster. White's minor pieces are extremely active, while black's two minor pieces are confined in place. Black's rooks don't have any files and are both non-beneficial. In fact, White's minor pieces are far stronger than the enemy rooks. So it's like, hello, this one of his bishop is more effective. See, that's what we have to talk about, is that piece effectiveness that we talked about, quality over quantity. That's what we're talking about. I like that example, that it's not how much of the equipment that you make, it's the quality of the equipment that you make that matters. What is clear is that white has every advantage in the position, while black only claim to fame is his material advantage. They need to be weighted against each other, and in this case it's not even close, since on top of everything else, I'll repeat myself here since it's a very important point. Excuse me. The black rooks, due to their lack of open files, are actually weaker than one of white's minor pieces. Nevertheless, the mere fact that black has a material advantage is more than enough compensation to convince most players to reject the line that starts with rook to e6. This line right here. Most learned players or beginning players would reject that because of the exchange. They would look at the one advantage that black has, but they would miss how much compensation they have. White has let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 things that they gain from this, and black only has one thing, an exchange advantage, and black can't even use it. It's pure case of logic versus unfounded fear. How can a player get beyond this fear? That's a question. He has to train himself to view each imbalance as something wonderful, and he has to view material as just another imbalance to be collected or rejected, depending on the nature of the individual position. So what Jeremy Soman is saying is, rather than looking at the point count, 5 pawns versus 3, you need to look at the imbalance. What does that piece sacrifice give me? It's not if we can even take away piece sacrifice. What does that move give me? We'll even take material out of there. What does that move give me? What is that exchange? The exchange give me? What do I get for it? and you have to ask those questions to yourself. That what imbalance does this imbalance do I need to open up a position even at the cost of a rook for a bishop? Does this benefit me? And you have to get over the fear of material sacrifice, because it's not about the material, it's about checkmate. Remember, that's the whole goal of chess, is checkmate. So if you have to sacrifice a rook to get checkmate, that's the whole goal is to basically take the entire land of the king, I mean of black, and the way to do it is to basically kill the king, and that's what checkmate is. Okay, if a player is going to master my concept of reading the needs of a position by recognizing and trying to make use of all the imbalances, then he must place material gain or sacrifice on the same list. Yes, some imbalances do have a bit more importance than others. However, although material are an insecure king both demands extreme attention. You can't place them on the pedestals and lose sight of the big picture. So you can't. If I told you most non-masters that they could have this position as white, they wouldn't be pleased. After all, black seems safe enough. Here, we'll get this position set up here. This is a grandmasters, two grandmasters that are playing. So we'll get this position set up so that when I'm reading it to you, you kind of have a visual example to equate it to. Just give me a second. So if you're like feeling like, man, I wish I could do that, we all have the problem of material greed. Every player has that. Some of the best grandmasters have missed some moves because of material blindness. They call it chess blindness or move blindness. I think what we should call it is material blindness, because what they're looking at is that they have a misconception of what a positional sacrifice can do. And I think that would change a lot of the perspective. Like this, hold on, let me get a drink here, and then it's black to move here. So don't feel bad if when you're first starting out as a chess player that you miss sometimes sacrifice, and you go, why didn't I see that? I could have won, rather than maybe lose or a draw. Just take what Jeremy Silman's lessons that we're talking about to heart, and then apply them to your game, and you can't but improve at that point. There we go. Let's see. Did anybody he faced? He hasn't faced Hare Krishna yet. I think this is Hare Krishna, if I'm not mistaken. Who's a really great India player. I followed some of his games. He's a really strong player. Yep, you got it. That's the player. But we all sometimes have a problem though with material. So it's not, and most of the grandmasters, when they get past like in the 2700 level club, they kind of have this concept that we're going to be going over. So we got to look at it from black's perspective. Okay, here we go. Now, all right, here now we're going to read about kind of this before we even started the moves. If I told you most non-masters that they could have this position as white, they wouldn't be too pleased. After all, black seems safe enough, right? and he's up. He's a pawn up, and also has the move. Nevertheless, white has his perks too, and these must be this basically weighed in the balance against black's small material pluses. Small material plus. Take a moment and see if you can list the imbalances. Ready? Okay. Yeah, all right. Can you see the imbalances? I'll give you some time to look at this board, and so that you could participate a little bit. Do you see an imbalance that for both players? And take a second. I'll give you a second to look. Look for the imbalance for white. Look for the imbalance for black, and I'll be right back. I'll give you a second to. What the imbalances could be is a pawn, space, it doesn't matter. Just look at it and do your best to figure it out. Type it in if you want, or if I come back and you say I see all the imbalances, then we'll go with that too, and we'll read more about it. Okay, starting now. See if you can find the imbalances. That's okay. Okay. So we'll read kind of what the imbalances are for black, and we'll read what the imbalances are for white. Black's Black has one extra pawn. That's all he has to cheer about. Nevertheless, it does carry some weight and forces white to prove sufficient compensation, since if black can hold things together, it managed to make some soothing trades, and then he might go on to win an endgame with the little extra pass pawn. White, the D3 bishop is good and active, while black's bishop is not only undefended but also playing the role of defending the pawn. Black's pawn on d5 and f5 are both vulnerable and will need to be carefully defended. White's knight is a tower of strength, while black's steed is passive and defending. White's queen is oops, I think I have this position set up wrong. I have the bishop in the wrong spot. I'll have to get that set up. It's tower of strength, while black's steed is a passive defender. White's queen is far more active than black's. White control of the open e-file takes aim at the slightly vulnerable e6 bishop, and also the hole on e5. Okay, I apologize about this. I have to get a new position set up here. Somehow I got the pieces in the wrong order. That was really weird. Okay, I have to delete this here. And then reload it up. There we go. Okay, now you get to see how the knight's a tower of strength here. The bishop, actually white's knight's a tower of strength, sorry. And you get to see how this knight is doing, it's guarding here, this bishop's guarding there, this bishop's guarding there. This knight on e5 that is occupying the gaping e5 spot. All of white's pieces are more they're better, let's just say. When you add up these things, it's clear that white has a lot going for him or her, and full compensation for the pawn. So this could actually be a game you played. So just remember that. It's not just because it's Ivacek or Hare Krishna that this position can't arise in your game as white. So don't worry about that you won't get something like this. You may, and then you'll be able to sacrifice a pawn and get positional advantage. In a nutshell, his army is more active than black's. Black has several weak squares in his camp, and white has clear targets on d5 and f5 to attack, while white's position is free from weaknesses. Of course, black is far from doomed, but using the words of Ivacek, for the center pawn, white has a good game and well-placed pieces. The game continued quietly, with white calmly building up his forces and adding pressure to the enemy targets. This is black played this move here. Queen d6. So Hare Krishna is black, and he's up a pawn, but his position's so defensiveness. So rook a to d to c is what was played by Ivacek. F to E, so it's trying to get the open file, one of the open files prepared. Rook C2, and Ivacek wants to, or white wants to go Rook E C1. Bishop D7. Rook's oh, C E. Okay, he swung the rook the other way. Note that black's A rook is tied down to the defense of A7. So A6 is played here. If queen to B6, this is a double question mark blunder. Because it fails, queen takes B, A takes, knight takes, knight takes. Hold on. Takes D. Rook takes E2. Rook knight. Oh, knight takes here. And then if pawn takes, rook takes, and you're up an exchange. A whole piece. I mean, a whole miter piece. So that's why A6, and then Ivacek plays knight to C4. This is his exclam move. It unleashes, he has full control over the E file. The knight can't be taken because the queen is pinned to the pawn, and potentially the knight will be jumping into B6. This will cause a lot of chaos. The knight heads for E3 if it could. So E3. So it wants to go to E3, where it will aim at. Oh, so it's trying to take scope at these points. Queen C6, knight E3, rook A C8. G6 loses. G6 move is right here to hold on to the pawn. Loses to knight takes D5 exclam. Knight takes D5, and then bishop to C4 with a pin here, an attack here, and then attack there. It's just too much, and the position would fall apart. Knight takes F5 here. Bishop takes F5. Bishop takes knight takes 5. Bishop takes. Rook takes E2. Rook takes E2. Then rook E8. Rook to C2, and because he doesn't want to give up rooks and more towards a draw at that point. Queen D6, G3, G6, then bishop to C8. And white, who now has material equality on top of superior minor pieces. The bishop dominates the knight. The target on D5 and more. Okay, the bishop dominates the knight. The target on D5 and more activity. Eventually, white won after a long battle. The student should carefully look over these first two examples again. Clearly, the first one gave white a dominant position, with blacks bound and basically caged up and completely helpless. The players 1400 and higher should feel extremely comfortable and even excited, giving up material for such a one-sided result. Our next example, our second example, Ivacek versus Hare Krishna, was altogether different. In that case, white had good compensation for the sacrificial pawn, but many players wouldn't feel completely comfortable in white's shoes. This kind of sacrifice would be more natural for a player 2000 and higher. Nevertheless, whether a player is comfortable with something or not, if you read the board and decide that it's the right thing to do based on our battle of imbalances, then you should bravely give it a try. At the very least, when you see such things occur in master games, you'll finally understand why it was done and have greater appreciation for the concept. Of course, sacrifices do carry more elements of risk, since if you don't get enough compensation or don't use the compensation properly, you can easily find yourself down material in some miserable endgame, or wiped out even earlier by the enemy's greater firepower. Naturally, there will be cases where you think a positional sacrifice is called for, but misjudge the extent of your compensation and go down in flames. In these instances, you should have to dust off your ego, analyze what went wrong, and give it another try if the board begs to do so. If the board begs you to do so, sorry. Okay. A good example comes from our own career. I was never comfortable with giving up my queen for other units. Even if the material I got from my queen put me ahead, I still didn't like it. This mental block stayed with me right up to the high 2100 level. And it was only after I lost a game due to my inability to swap off my queen for my opponent's rook, bishop, and knight. Obviously, this is more than enough for the queen, but unreasonable fear is often a stronger force than logic and facts. That I decided to put an end to this nuisance once and for all. From that point on, I never hesitated to enter such situations. At first, I wasn't comfortable with it. Other stuff for my queen idea, but if I felt that I would stand well with a solid position and a rook, bishop, pawn for my queen, I would push fear away and do it. Now, how about 3 minor pieces for my queen? No problem. And slowly but surely, such things became a natural part of my game, and fear stopped playing any role in that kind of decision. My psychology was clear. If you lose, you lose, but at least you have the courage to stand up for what you think is right, for the position. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing worse than getting pushed off the board and realizing that the lack of self-confidence didn't allow you to even put up a fight. This is a Sicilian. This is a game that he. This is Svidler, I think. Peter Svidler as white. I know I'm kind of reading a little bit, but I have to get this down for you to understand. This is important. This is what will break the barrier. If you're a 2100 level player, this is what will break the barrier for you to go to, as I like to say, the next level of in 2100 and above. This will be this type of thinking and fear getting rid of is what's going to push you over the next basically plateau or yeah, plateau. That's basically that's the right term. We're gonna pull up another board. We may have to make another maybe another section. Nope, perfect. We still have enough room on this study. We're gonna do the game out. It's the following complex position right here is where the book picks up. White C pawn is about to fall. He is pretty much and he's pretty much has to decide on C4, which leaves black with a scary looking passed D pawn and approximately an equal chances are the more he says macho bishop G4, which is the pre-lure to an exchange sacrifice. Filler decided to go for the gusto, to go for it all, basically. He's putting it all on the line. That's what I like to say. He plays this move. This is an actual piece sacrifice, so it's not going to because he's going to be able to play h6 thick. Whoa, that's a mistake. This has got to be a mistake. Rook takes f5, queen g7, queen to e7 is actually a dubious move here. This evaluation allows black to gain a bit of time kicking the queen around. Queen h4 was actually was better with equal chances. G takes f and bishop takes f. Optimally, this looks pretty good. White gets a pawn for the exchange. c2 is well defended. The enemy pawn on a7 and d4 need looking after, and the position of black's king has become a bit drafty. It's clear that white has real compensation, but there's a problem. White needs to play with energy and try to develop some initiative. If black can prevent this, and if he can consolidate his position, activate his rooks, they might end up overpowering the white army. And indeed, after some errors, this is exactly what happened. Rook e8, queen d6, rook c to d8, queen a6, queen g5, bishop d3, rook e7, rook f1, king g7, g3, queen d5, king g1, rook d6, queen c8. Oops, sorry. Queen d6, rook c, queen c8, queen e6, queen b8, rook b6, queen d8, rook d6, queen b8, rook d5, rook f4, rook g5, rook f3. This guards because what you're doing is rook f3, and then queen e5 is what is going to be played. Yeah, enjoy this. This is we're doing piece sacrifice. Fiddler's white. He just sacrificed a rook for a basically some compensation, but he ends up not being able to win this. Queen takes c5, rook take. Oops. Oh, sorry about that. I thought I saw rook takes c5. It's rook e5, rook d8. There, he doesn't want to trade off the rooks. h5, rook f2, and then rook e6. Black slowly but steadily converting his material advantage, and eventually he'll consolidate and more likely win. Queen d8, rook f6, rook e2, queen f4, rook e4, this was Svidler's mistake. This is the blunder that costed Svidler the game here, because he didn't need to do this. Oh, you would? It gave black basically, I think it gave up the e5. Let me see. Did I miss? Is this move 46? Yeah. It said that black actually was white. Sorry, white was actually better in this line here, and it looks kind of interesting because there's no real way for mate to happen because this bishop covers f1, so there's no real threat that could hurt us. He can't check along the e3 because the rook guards that. And what you're basically going to start to do is play queen e7 and then try to infiltrate in via f8 check. So you're going to try to do that, queen e7 to f8. After the king moves, you can then mate, basically mate 3. And so this was the position that would have given Svidler equality, but the more natural move, rook e4, would be played by a human player, but this is more subtle, using your imbalance. Because there's really no way that black can get any compensation. If he tries checking, you can actually go king h1. F1's covered, and e4 is covered. So if you try checking here, you can't play there because of the rook eyes that. So you could go, black can go to perpetual if they want, and they could try this move here, rook takes g, and then try somehow to get some compensation via that way. But I'm thinking that still it's a pure draw. I don't think really they can make any headway even with this here. I'm thinking that you could try checking here, but he just comes up. You can't even check here because of this bishop. Black can't even check there. And if check here, you can even take there. And if you try checking here, you might even, I'm thinking you can potentially play there, and if check here, you can even do that. It depends on how far up the board they are, and it depends how far the king is away from the pawns. I would say that not all the time. If the king's close enough to the two pawns with the rook, then two pawns aren't good enough for a rook. But if the king's far away and the rook is all by its lonesome trying to stop the pawns rolling up the board and the king is close enough to the pawns, I would agree with that statement. But it's all, remember, it's all about the position. Then I would agree with it. Then it would be better for white. Then it would be better for the person who has two pawns. As long as it's, I think it was Jeremy Silman in his endgame course said that it's like pawns on d5, I mean on the fifth rank, and if one's on the sixth rank, it's better than a rook if you can get your king to support him up the board, because there's no way that a rook can handle. I'm not. You know what? That's what I've learned from my teacher was that yeah, it all depends on where the king is when it comes to the two pawns, because we actually talked about that, and there are positions where two pawns are greater than a rook, but it's usually when the king is farther away from the pawns and the rook itself has to stop the two pawns. There's no way in the world that that can actually happen. So that's why you have to always be, like what Jeremy Silman says, weigh the imbalances. Okay, here, where did I, hold on, did I, okay, perfect, we're good. Queen f2, king h1, and then h4. So Fiddler's exchange sacrifice, the exchange sacrifice, the wrong thing to do. So was Fiddler's exchange sacrifice the wrong thing to do? Will the trauma make him avoid such sacrifices in the future? Not at all. His decision made good sense, but he was outplayed and the game slipped out of his hands. It happens to everyone. I guarantee that he'll be making many more exchange sacrifices as his career continues. Let's see. Only by trying something and getting hands-on experience can you truly understand it. And even if you courageously go for a grand scheme and it all goes up in flames, you'll still feel happy with yourself for giving it a try, and then you'll come back even stronger. As long Jeremy Silman had a really good statement that it's better to have. Well, let me see. What time is? I think I'm about ready to. Yep, This is it, and we are actually starting another section, so that's a good spot to start up. We'll summarize really quick what we learned from exchange sacrifices, and that's that. Exchange sacrifices, if properly played, like we saw in our first game, rook to e6. Allows with the bishop takes rook and then e takes the pawn, it clogged up the position and made the exchange that black got for that piece. I think it was white got for that piece. It's this one here. I'll show you. I'll go down and I'll pick it up. It was this one right here. This exchange sacrifice right here. Right here is the one we were talking about. This exchange sacrifice made White's position so much better because it plugged everything up. It made it so that Black didn't have any open files, which made his rooks inferior to White's light squared bishop. And so we got to see the sacrifice there. Let me see if this right here was the Hare Krishna game. And white sacrificed a pawn. We'll go through it really quick and I'll show you. But he got compensation for that. And he actually ended up with a better minor piece, the knight versus bishop. Remember, pawns on both sides. Yeah. And three pawns, I mean the pawns on both sides, and the bishop dominates the knight. That's what we learned here. What we found out was also at this point, we're going to go to Peter Svidler's piece sacrifice right here. This move that Peter played right here had let the game slip away from him, which was Queen E7. The best continuation that would have held equality or maybe even a win for Svidler was Queen H4. So make sure if when you do a piece sacrifice that you calculate all the way through to the proper order. And remember, imbalances are important. That's what Jeremy Silman even had to get over. He said that he didn't want to sacrifice his queen for 3 pieces even though he was in a better position. He lost the game due to that, and he made up his mind that he was going to overcome the fear of sacrificing his queen for like a bishop, knight, knight, or a bishop, bishop, knight. And he won many games, and I believe that's probably how he got his IM rating, was that he overcame the fear of piece sacrifice. He says that certain sacrifices will are for certain ratings. He says some more, the higher rated you get, the deeper the sacrifices and the more imbalances that you can handle for compensation, you'll feel more comfortable doing that. That just comes with hands-on experience, like what he said, and practicing with it. And as long as you did your best and you fought a good fight, like how the Lord said, Paul even said that, I ran a good race, I fought a good fight, I finished. And so, you know what? If the Lord Jesus talks about that, and it's important that you run that race. Same thing with chess. As long as you give it your all, and that piece and you analyze that piece sacrifice, even if you got outplayed because of one move, like Svidler did Queen E7, and that's he got pushed around too much. Black consolidated their position and ended up winning. But even with that, remember he had the potential right down here with Rook. Instead of the move that was played, this is the losing move. He even had potential to draw the game with Rook E8 and potentially maybe even winning. So you know what? Don't be afraid to sacrifice, calculate it, and make sure that the sacrifice is called for in the position. And if it is, my friends, go all out on it and give it your best. Because you know what? That's what chess is all about, learning, improving, and getting stronger. And we'll leave it with that. So remember, take what you, like what Bruce Lee says, take what you've learned from today, the piece sacrifices, and apply it to your game and do something with it. That means if you see a sacrifice, have the courage to go all in for it if it's good and it wins for you. Don't be afraid to sacrifice. Remember, Morphy in his game at the Opera was down to a bishop and rook, and he still beat his opponents that had tremendous amount of material. It's all based on quality of your material, not quantity. And that's why it's important that you have the choice of salvation is as important as like the peace sacrifices and the choices over the board. You have to decide one day what you're going to do with the Lord Jesus. Are you going to receive him or reject him? It all comes down to that. We have to one day decide. We can't put it off. So, but that's what the Team Chess Cruncher model is about. Of why we study what we study is because we do this, and it's our motto of hanging up our coats, hanging up our hats, sitting down and studying when most won't. Team Chess Cruncher does, and that makes all the difference. Trust me, it does, my friends. And as Wesley So says, serve the Lord Jesus, and as I say, God bless. And I'll see you next time on Chess Cruncher TV. Have a blessed morning, afternoon, and evening. Lord willing, I'll be back on tomorrow. We'll continue to keep going over how to defeat the fear of peace sacrifices and exchange sacrifices and going all in. Like I always say, like a berserker, you're all in. But remember what Hannibal Smith said. Even inside of a random position, there's always a plan. There is no randomness, my friends. There's a plan in everything. And when you find it and the Lord talks to you about it and makes you really happy, you get to say, I love it when a plan comes together. Okay, 2 thumbs up. Hoorah. Be blessed, team. I'll see you tomorrow, Team Chess Cruncher. Bye-bye. And keep learning chess. Bye.